Well, it's an honor to talk to you. You've had such an incredible career so far. It's still going, still solving historical mysteries. And I got to know like the origin of this, where this came from when you first started to dive into things that just were bothering you. You had to answer the questions.
Well, it started out in childhood, really, and it was inspired by my mom. My mom, when before she had me, she said the one thing that she really wanted from her child was to have curiosity and just a an imagination to want to know and understand how life worked. And so she got an overdose of that in the sense that once I came out and joined the world, I was off and running. And one of the things that I was inspired from childhood is this insatiable appetite for wanting to know things, to understand things. So as a child, I was always asking questions all the time, trying to figure out things. And of course, to most parents, that would seem exhausting. And probably in today's times, it would be something subject to being medicated. So, so I think my insatiable appetite for wanting to know about how life worked and understanding things continued on because as a child, my number one desire was to be a medical illustrator. And what a medical illustrator does is they explain to doctors and to medical students how the human body works, complicated surgeries, and things like that. So from the age of 8, I was constantly pursuing this career to be a medical illustrator.
Hmm.
And at 14, I did my first medical illustrations when most kids are just being kids. I was actually in a surgical suite
Hmm.
illustrating the first what's called an intraocular lens implant. And that is what we do standard today where people go in for cataract surgery and they have their bad cataracts, an artificial lens put in. It's now standard procedure. Well, my drawings at age 14 were used by the FDA
Wow.
to actually make this procedure a authorized U.S. government approved surgical procedure.
Hmm.
So fast forward, I ended up continuing on to be to work in medical illustration and was hired by the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School, where I served for 5.5 years as a medical artist there on the staff of the medical school, medical photographer.
Hmm.
Well, that was just, I was working with the best minds, the greatest physicians, the greatest people. There were Nobel laureates. Matter of fact, my illustrations were used for Dr. Brown and Dr. Goldstein, Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein, who studied and won the Nobel Prize for their understanding of how cholesterol works. All
Hmm.
my illustrations were part of the package that in '85, the Nobel laureates, Goldstein and Brown, that were used in the package for their Nobel Prize. So working around smart people is contagious. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem I have is, you know, they always say in life that, a lot of people just don't seem to know enough. Well, it's I'm like a shop vac of like always trying to figure things out. So 1983 happens. The oil revenues in Texas are in the tank. And
Hmm.
it being a state supported medical school, what happens? They end up laying off my entire department. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do for a living? Well, as luck would have it, I'm driving, having just gotten let go from the medical school, and I nearly run across a guy who steps out in front of my car. I nearly drove over him. He's flipping me the finger and cussing at me and stuff, and saying, "Hey, look where you're going," And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so terribly sorry." And I look at this guy, and he looks at me, and he's like, "Farris," and I said, "Greg." I said, "Oh my God, this is a guy who I had gone to elementary school, had grown up with, junior high, the whole bit." I said, "Oh my God, what are you doing these days?" I said, "First off, I'm sorry to run you over." And he said, "Well, I'm sorry to flip you off." I said, "But here's the deal. I just got laid off from my job at the medical school." He said, "Well, let's have lunch." I said,
Hmm.
"Okay, you can treat since I'm unemployed." So we went and had lunch, and I said, "You never answer the question. What are you doing these days?" He kind of does the left and right and looks around. He said, "Well, I'm working for the FBI." I said, "Oh
Wow.
my God, the FBI?" I said, "I've always thought, wow, that would be incredible to work for the FBI." When I was 10 years old, 10,
Mhm.
I wrote J. Edgar Hoover a letter, which I still have the response back from J. Edgar Hoover. He responded to me in March of 1972. And of course, he died May of 1972.
Mhm.
But the thing was, I was looking, I wanted old wanted posters, Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, and the like. And of course, some clerk, some GS 3 or 4 who got the letter at FBI headquarters didn't understand my request and prepared a response, which Mr. Hoover signed and then sent back to me. But fast forward to 1983, he says, you should apply. So I ended up saying, well, I don't know how you apply. He said, well, come on down to the FBI office and we'll get you the application. 22-page application. I filled it out. And my parents were like, well, Farris, I can just tell you this. It's easier to get into Harvard than it is to the FBI. So you better be putting your resumes out there to try to find work. So I ended up, fast forward a year later, I ended up getting hired by the Bureau. And when I entered in on duty, 1984, they had the Republican National Convention. So I was assigned to the Dallas, initially to the Dallas field office, to work the Republican National Convention for 1985. And so all the original JFK assassination records were
Mhm.
coming back into the Dallas field office. And I was like, well, what is all this stuff? And they go, oh, these are the original files for the JFK assassination. And I was like, well, why are they coming into the office? And they said, oh, we had during the House Select Committee in the 70s had sent them all up to FBI headquarters. And in fact, they were trying to clean out their closets at FBI headquarters and wanted to get rid of them and send them back to what's called the Office of Origin where the crime occurred.
Mhm.
Fast forward, the files were voluminous in nature. And like anything in the US government, if you show too much interest in something, you get assigned it. So I was assigned, on top of working criminal investigations and cases and all that kind of good stuff, I was assigned to go through all the original JFK assassination records to make sure that we got back what FBI headquarters did. Now, I did not set out, Paul, to be a JFK expert. Now, I will qualify and say I was at Love Field on November 22nd with my parents on the famous day. I
Mhm.
saw Lee Harvey Oswald shoot Jack Ruby live on television on Sunday, November 24th. But I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would end up becoming the FBI's, the Bureau's expert on the JFK assassination files. So you take a young guy who, when I entered on duty, I was 22, getting ready to be 23. A voracious appetite for wanting to know this stuff because I've been born and raised in Dallas and been around it, and so I started reading all the files. Now, backtracking slightly, in 1981, when I was on the staff of the medical school, I ended up getting to be the FB, the actual photographer, forensic photographer for the exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald. So in October of 81, when they dug up Lee Harvey Oswald in Fort Worth, I was at the site because they
Wow.
were initially were going to do the exhumation at the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, but it got political, so they moved it to Baylor Hospital. So I wasn't allowed to be a part of the Baylor Hospital thing because I was working at the medical school. But I said, what the hell? I'm going to go out there since I had the clearance to go out there to the grave and see him dug up. So then while I'm working for the Bureau, I start reading all these files.
Mhm.
And the files, I mean, we're talking it's over 500,000 records.
Mhm.
And so you get to 1991, I believe it was. I get this phone call at the FBI in Dallas, and they said, "You have a call from Oliver Stone's production company. Mr. Stone wants to speak to you." And I'm thinking, okay, this is a crank call of some sort. 'Cause I got a lot of nut calls. And so they ended up saying, Mr. Rookstool, we understand you're the FBI's expert on the JFK assassination, and we'd like to hire you to be a technical advisor for the movie that we're doing on JFK. And at that time, it was called Project X. That was the working screenplay title. And I said, well, let me explain to you how it works. Being a humble government servant, I'm not allowed to accept money, but I can provide you technical expertise. But there's a procedure in which how we do this. We have to first have you write out the questions. I have to prepare my responses, and then we have to do it old school, which is fax it to FBI headquarters. They review it, bless it, And then they'll fax it back to you. And they go, no, 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 that's not how we want you on the set. We want you to answer questions. And I said, well, I don't think the Bureau is going to authorize that. I said, well, why don't you go ahead and come to dinner tonight and, get a chance to meet everybody and the whole thing. So I had a friend of mine who was working on the production and he backdoored me a copy of the screenplay, made me a bootleg copy of the screenplay. And so I read it. And I was like, "Oh my God! The only thing they have right in this film is the victim, the date, and the location."
Oh no.
So I go to meet with them at the Stoneleigh Hotel.
Yeah.
Stone was staying at the Stoneleigh Hotel. The production staff was at the Melrose Hotel, and I go and have dinner with them. And I say to Oliver Stone, I said, "Well, Mr. Stone, respectfully, the only thing you got right in the screenplay is the victim, the date, and location." And he says, "Well, how did you get the screenplay? You're not allowed that." I said, "Well, the FBI, we have sources and methods and all that." And he said, "Well, no, you can't have that." I said, "Well, I do." And he said, "Well, you have to, no, you can't have the screenplay." And I said, "Well, I've already read it, and this is my position. But I'm more than happy to provide you technical expertise. But as I told your team, it's going to have to be through this process." Well, he goes, "Well, that won't work." Well, that kind of encounter with Stone in the movie set into motion, unbeknownst to me. He didn't think of me in an adversarial or hostile way. He actually kind of respected my position. But what I did not know at the time that the movie, this Hollywood rendition of a movie, would set into motion a kind of a steamroll effort, kind of like we have now, people saying, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files. It's the same thing with JFK, release the JFK files. So they ended up putting pressure and said, we need to release the FBI JFK assassination records. So they turn to me and they say, okay, well, who's our expert on the JFK assassination? And well, it turns out to be me. So I have to brief the FBI director, the attorney general, ended up George Herbert Walker Bush, who was president at the time, congressional leaders. I wrote the testimony for the FBI director to testify before Congress about releasing the files. Senator John Glenn, the first man to orbit the Earth, he ended up putting forth a bill in Congress that would, in essence, create the John F. Kennedy Assassinations Records Act. And this act, which ended up being signed into law by George Herbert Walker Bush, October 26, 1992, said for all the files they would have to be released. So yours truly was
Mm.
tasked then with taking all these files and transporting the FBI headquarters. Now, one of the things that happened was I always tell people, during the course of your career, you're going to work for a psychotic supervisor. You're going to have some person that you wonder how, in the name of God, they ever got promoted to be your supervisor. We had one in the Dallas field office. We actually nicknamed him Budo, the acronym for Big Ugly Dumb One. This guy, he's still alive, so I won't say his name, but all the people in the Bureau still affectionately remember him as Budo. And so Budo, he tells the special agent in charge, I think what we're going to do is we're going to have Rookstool drive these files from Dallas to DC in a U-Haul truck. So I was like, you've got to be kidding me. These are the originals. There's no copies that are unredacted. These are the original files, and you want me to drive them in a non-FBI vehicle, 1,372 miles, 26 hours nonstop in a U-Haul truck? You've got to be kidding me. And he's like, that's exactly what we want you to do.
Wow.
So I was thinking, this is the most psychotic uh, idiotic thing I've ever done in my career. And I think to this day, it still will be fondly remembered as the most reckless, irresponsible, dangerous task that I've ever did with the Bureau. And so I said, well, we have the Bureau planes. We have our two planes that we can fly them up to FBI headquarters
Mhm.
on a government vehicle, and they'll be secure because we're talking about classified information. I had what at the time was and still is the highest security clearance that was
Mhm.
granted. It's called an SCI clearance, and that is you can read above top secret and compartmented information. And so I was assigned to be the record custodian of all these files. So they nixed the idea of flying them in the plane. And so, sure enough, ended up driving them 1,372 miles, 26 hours nonstop in a U-Haul truck, where I got assigned to be on the JFK assassinations task force at FBI headquarters. And so the problem then became, you're dealing with a bunch of GS4 clerks and people like that, the support staff that have no interest. This is just paper. This is stuff. This is just more crap you gotta, move across the desk. And, they're not realizing this is American history. This is what everyone has been wanting to see.
Mhm.
We end up having to work with another new government entity called the JFK Assassinations Records Review Board.
Mhm.
So I was the liaison to the Records Review Board. It was a presidential appointment with the review board. And so I became the guy that explained to them what all this stuff was. So this insatiable appetite for knowing and understanding, I've lectured now all over the world. I've met every president since Nixon. I've lectured in Europe. The Prince of Monaco had me come give a lecture on the assassination in Monaco. I never set out to be an expert on this matter. And so my work with the records to this day, I still get called. People were asking me, well, what's in the last remaining records? And now and so until they finally were released, I couldn't talk about. I mean, it's like people will say, "Well, what's in them?" Well, they're still classified. So I can't
Yeah.
tell you what is still classified, but I can tell you that most of these records, the 6 million total records in totality, no one's going to read. No
Yeah.
chat GBT, no artificial intelligence software platform is going to be able to make sense of all this because, all these records, they're so complex. They have nuances and human errors and screw ups and things like that, which someone like me who went to night school after, while working for the Bureau, worked towards my PhD in history. And so the thing was, it's the history and working for the government and working at the medical school with all the doctors who treated JFK gives me a unique perspective. And there's no other person out there, unfortunately, like me, or some people would say maybe, thank God, that there's not another one out there like myself who's actually read all this stuff. And
Mhm.
so, in 1984, they were putting together, the Dallas County Historical Foundation was putting together the plans for the 6th Floor Museum. So they asked me to volunteer. They called me, the term they called me was their chief historical consultant.
Hmm.
I just, kind of poo pooed off on that and said, no, I'm just a historical advisor, and principal advisor. And they always refer to me as the chief historical consultant for the 6th Floor. So it's one of those mysteries that, if you could say, well, was it all of this some sort of master plan? God's pulling off the biggest conspiracy of all time. It reminds me of the old joke that these two conspiracy buffs, they die and they go to heaven, and the first thing they get to the pearly gates and they turn to each other and say, we have just really one question, St. Peter, we have to ask. And that is, we have to know, did Lee Harvey Oswald kill President Kennedy or not? And St. Peter says, well, I have to tell you, yes, he was the sole assassin who killed President Kennedy, wounded Governor Conley, and killed Officer J.D. Tippit. The one conspiracy buff turns to the other one and says, oh my God, the conspiracy's bigger than we ever imagined. And so it's kind of like, as I say, all these experiences that I've had, the sum parts and the total, the best writers in Hollywood couldn't create these fortunate circumstances. And I feel totally blessed to have known all these people, to have interviewed the witnesses, to have handled all this original evidence. I mean, the evidence that's in the National Archives, you can't handle it anymore. But I was in a position where I could handle Oswald's rifle. I could handle, these materials and had access to these things. And at the time, I never envisioned I can still remember when my mom told me that JFK had been shot and killed, and that is an indelible memory in my life. And then 1988, Jack Ruby's brother, Earl Ruby, is at North Park Mall in Dallas, and I just happened to be walking by, and I see him at a bookstore autographing books, and I said, "You look just like Jack Ruby's brother." And he goes, "Well, I am. I'm Earl Ruby." He said,
Wow.
"Well, can you help me, tell me more?" Because I introduced myself, told him who I was, my background. He says, "I might be able to ask you to help me on my civil trial that I'm working on getting my estate of all of Jack's property back." And I said, "Well, I'll help you out, but I can't provide you legal advice." And he said, "No, no, no. I just want you to help me navigate all this stuff." I said, "Okay." Well, I ended up taking 2 weeks of personal vacation time to help him with his trial, and we ended up winning. It was the testimony that I came up with that was the winning case to get the executor of Jack Ruby's estate, who is crooked and a really creepy attorney. This guy, when I say he was creepy, he was billing the estate for hours of working on the probate matters of the estate. He billed 26 hours in one day. And so, in cross examination or direct examination, they asked him and said, "Well, are you aware, Mr. Mayor, that we only have 24 hours in a day and you billed for 26 hours?" He said, "Well, that's what I did." And so the jury looked at this guy like, this guy is a crooked attorney, and ended up winning all the property back of Jack Ruby. So the problem then became for Earl Ruby is, what do I do with Jack's gun and Jack's fedora and all this clothes? He goes, "I can't, put it on a plane and take it back home with me." So we ended up putting it all in my safe deposit box. And so I had Jack Ruby's pistol, his jock strap, his clothes, every single thing you can imagine. The gun that he killed Lee Harvey Oswald in. I had that in my safe deposit box. And so Earl said to me, he says, "Farris, I want to give you something." And again, I say, "Earl, I'm a humble government servant. I'm not allowed to take anything. Or your friendship is worth a lot." I said, "But there is something I would like." He said, "What's that?" I said, "I'd like to fire Jack Ruby's pistol." He goes, "Really? Okay, let's do it." So I called a friend of mine at the medical examiner's office who I'd worked with. He's a former FBI agent. And I called up Irv and I said, "Hey, Irv, what would you think about if I brought Jack Ruby's pistol by and we fired it into the water chamber?" He says, "How soon can you get here?" And I
Wow.
said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes." So we drove the pistol over to the ME's office and we fired it into the water chamber. And so Earl goes, "Wow, that's pretty incredible. You have a slug from the gun?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Can you fire a few more of those?" I said, "Sure." So we fired, like, I don't know, 12 of these rounds, and then I put mine up, poured it up in acrylic, uh, suspended, and it was sitting in my office at the FBI. And then the gun goes up for auction, and the guy Anthony Puglisi, who ended up purchasing the weapon, Earl told him, says, "There's one guy you need to talk to. You need to go meet Farris in Dallas." So he flies to Dallas. He meets me. He sees the slug up there in the acrylic on my bookshelf in my office. And he goes, "What's this?" I said, "I'm the last guy to fire Jack Ruby's pistol in Dallas before it went up for auction." He goes, "That's a great idea." I
Yeah.
said, "What do you mean great idea?" He says, "I could fire bullets and sell them." And I said, "Well," and he goes, "Yeah." So allegedly, I don't know
Mm.
if this is the real deal or not. He fired 5,000 bullets
Oh,
through
wow.
the gun, which, if you fired a lightweight Colt Cobra pistol 5,000 rounds through it, probably wouldn't be of
Yeah.
value. But he alleges that he fired 5,000 and then he sold them, and you can find them occasionally on eBay
Wow.
for a lot of money and stuff like that. So all this insatiable appetite, going back to being a child, is something that, it's been with me my entire life, and it's not going away anytime soon. And as I say, I feel very, very fortunate to have had the life that I have, and I'm very, very healthy, thank goodness. And so hope to be doing this for a long period of time.
Absolutely. Well, and it's such a fascinating story. I mean, you need your own movie or TV show, it sounds like.
Well, I'm working right now. I'm working on a documentary film, but in three books. One of which is my story on the JFK records and all these, because the human story, the human dynamic of this story. I mean, the screw ups, the mistakes. These are the things that you won't find in the records that you only find from actually talking to people. So I've got three book projects right now, one of which is my book project. I've got a couple of more that I'm working on as well. But the problem with my time is like when I got asked to be, I have done a series of films. I've done, if people go to my website, they can see all the films I've done. You know, I've got Emmys, Peabodys, Academy Award nominations, all that kind of stuff, which it's kind of funny because my wife is very upset with me because I keep all those awards in a box in a closet. I don't have them out and on my ego wall and stuff like that. But the funny thing is, when I got contacted to appear in the film festival that's coming up in September in Garland, they had asked me about, you know, appearing, talking about JFK, this JFK documentary. And then also they said they're going to premiere Bonnie and Clyde. And I said, oh my God, the Bonnie and Clyde story
Hmm.
is incredible because I was 5 years old when they were filming the Bonnie and Clyde's, the movie that came out in 67. I was five at the time when they were filming it in 66. And so what happened was I said, oh my God, I can tell you story after story about the Bonnie and Clyde story. And in the movie, I said, you know, that's really incredible. I said, but what's crazy is when I met Raylene Linder, who's Bonnie's niece, and Buddy Barrow, who both will appear at the film festival with myself. Um, Raylene said, you know, I think somebody told me that you did some DNA work or something like that. Or she goes, you know, we're going to auction off some of Bonnie's, things that were recovered from the car after they were killed and stuff like that. And so the head of the auction house said to me, he said, "Oh, you've got DNA skills and stuff." I said, "Yeah, I can help you out with that." So I ended up taking DNA specimens from Bonnie's niece, Raylene Linder. And we did a DNA comparison with a laboratory in Fort Worth to include or exclude whether it was her DNA on there. And then I got roped in because of my exhumation background with Lee Harvey Oswald into being on the exhumation team of Bonnie Parker,
Wow.
where they're going to dig up Bonnie and move her from one cemetery to the other to be buried next to Clyde. So, you know, all these experiences I had with JFK get rolled over into now Bonnie and Clyde, which is something, again, it's all just the synergy and, you know, that things happen like that. And then the craziest thing of all was discovering through all this genealogy and genetics and all this. The wackiest thing of all was finding out and discovering just only a couple of years ago that actually Bonnie and Clyde are both my cousins.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Oh, so Ray, you know, Raylene, Linder, and Buddy. Uh, Buddy is not and I didn't know this, and most people didn't know this until we were doing the DNA testing and said, "Hey, Buddy, we need your blood and saliva." And then Buddy goes, "Well, I'm not actually a blood relative. I was adopted as a kid." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, that's fine. That makes sense." But the funny thing is Raylene and Buddy, you know, this is going to be like a family reunion of sorts, you know, with us appearing in this film and all of this kind of stuff. And it's funny how you don't expect that in life. You don't expect to things that you've studied the most about or thing you know is really a family story. And so coming away from this whole story and this film festival, you know, it's like I get to live portions of my life and share it with other people for their entertainment value or whatever. But you know,
Mm.
it's like for me, it's like just this is just an everyday occurrence. This is like, you know, this is what I do.
Yeah.
So films, writing, lecturing, speaking, and talking about this, you know, most people wouldn't even believe half of this stuff. And you know, when people go to my website, farrisrookstool.com, you know, I have people that troll the website just sitting there like, you know, it's some sort of entertainment value for them. But it's my life, it's my work, it's what I do for a living, you know. I get asked to give talks to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis and all. I just can't do it because and I like the other thing too is people are always were wanting me to give tours. I'm not a
Oh,
tour guide. Oh, I got my cousin coming in from out of town. Would you give him a tour? I'm like, no,
yeah.
I'm, no, that's not what I do. So
Hmm.
I got a call once a few years ago from the special agent in charge of the United States Secret Service in Dallas, and of course I knew her, and she says, "Ferris, I have a favor to ask of you," and I thought, okay, what is it? She says the director wants to fly down, and she wants you and the all the assistant directors from DC. She wants you to spend the entire day with her, and take the entire executive team of the Secret Service on a full tour and the whole thing. I said, seriously? She goes, yeah. So we came down. Now they all flew down. We motorcaded. I was the guy. The funny thing was, before I've always been around the people that are getting in the black, Suburban. This time it was me getting in the Suburban, with the director and the whole thing. And we took over the entire sixth floor. Kind of annoyed the executive director of the sixth floor. I still, by the way, I was given a lifetime pass as a consultant to be in the sixth floor. Here I contributed hundreds upon thousands of hours. I've taken everyone, the Prince of Monaco through the sixth floor museum. I've taken Dan Aykroyd and Charlton
Wow.
Heston and, all these people, I mean, every kind of person you can imagine in the sixth floor. And now, I guess I don't know what reason, they make me pay to go through the museum. So
Wow.
anyway, when we went through the museum, I said to the director, I said to the Secret Service, I said, "I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to break out your government credit card here and pay for everybody." And of course, we did. And then immediately, the director of the sixth floor was scampering up there, like running a sprint race. That the director of the Secret Service, first time ever in the history since the crime, the director of the United States Secret Service was coming to the crime scene, which I was like, really? How is this possible? So this, as I say, Paul, is like this is my life.
Yeah.
It's never dull.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, if I didn't have the photographs to
Hmm.
most people would say, oh, matter of fact, Winston Groom, who wrote Forrest Gump,
Hmm.
there's a quote on my website that's from Winston Groom. He said, Forrest would love Ferris
Yeah.
because I've had that kind of life.
Mm.
That's where, I feel every day, I never know from one minute to the next, what's going to be the next thing. And that if you can get up in the every day and feel like, you have something important to do, that's great.
Yeah.
Some people don't have that they're not blessed like that. They just go to their job and they do their work and that's that thing. I've never been that guy. I've always been an out of the box, different, different kind of guy. And that's why I don't probably fit in traditional jobs.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's one of those things that um, being someone who is creative and very driven and has a lot of energy and a lot of curiosity and believes in life, I still know that one of these days when I get ready to check out, I'm still going to have like, no, but I have my list. I still have more stuff to do, I still got more things I have to
Yeah.
do. And that's where, to say that if you could judge your life on any one thing, most people are remembered for one thing. I am fortunate enough to be remembered for many different things, and that to me is, I mean, I've always believed the two things in life is to be loved and be remembered. That's the greatest thing you can ever have is to be loved and be remembered. And I feel like, some people remember me for JFK, some people remember me for other things, but if they remember you, I mean, and more importantly, if they love you, that's
Hmm.
the two greatest gifts that you can ever be blessed with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of curious minds will be watching this going, see, I want to do this. But your story is so unique. But what kind of advice would you give to somebody that wants to follow in your footsteps and pursue these great mysteries?
Well, I think the best advice is never give up.
Hmm.
Number one, you can have a dream. First off, since there's not another person out there like myself, I didn't have a mentor to say, how do I do this? To give you a good example, this is a great example. You talking about a Hail Mary example
Yeah.
here? Okay. A Hail Mary example would be, I'll give you two of them. You get a twofer.
All right, great.
The first one, I was working a criminal case, very high profile criminal case for the FBI. It was a cold case. It was assigned to me because it was a cold case. And I worked large scale criminal investigations, and it came to me as a cold case. They were looking for something that we could completely turn this cold case around on. And one of the things was I started looking at all these records. And if you've been in Dallas, it's one of the most famous cases in Dallas, the Walker Rayleigh case. It's a
Mm.
Methodist minister who's alleged to have strangled his wife and left her for dead, but sent these typewritten church letters to himself on the church typewriter before he attacked his wife. That's what we believed. And so I analyzed the letters, and I found on the letters that they had been processed with this chemical called ninhydrin, which is a way to lift DNA fingerprints. From my medical school days, I remembered these simple squamous epithelial cells that line and cover your mouth, that when you lick a stamp or lick an envelope, that in fact you leave cells with red blood cells on these stamps and envelopes.
Mm.
So I started saying to myself, I wonder if there could be DNA on the stamps and envelopes on these letters.
Mhm.
The DNA unit had just started up in 1990 at FBI headquarters. So I talked to the DNA unit. And they said, well, if it's got an anhydride on it, it's going to degrade the DNA. We'll never know. And I said, but we need to test this, these letters.
Mhm.
So this is the first criminal case we ever tested for DNA off of stamps and envelopes in the FBI. And so I researched a way to lift these DNA specimens off of the stamps and envelopes. And then what happened was they came back and said, no, Farris, we don't have enough high molecular weight DNA. So I was like, well, crap, what are we going to do? So there was a guy, as time marched on, a guy named Dr. Kerry Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize
Mhm.
for his invention of what's called polymerase chain reaction. So I called Kerry Mullis up, and he was living in, I think it was San Diego at the time. He was a
Mhm.
surfboarder, but a genius of a guy. I
Mhm.
called him up. I said, Dr. Mullis, this is Farris Rookstool with the Dallas FBI, and I need to ask you a scientific question. And he's like, sure. I said, can we use PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to amplify the DNA to get higher molecular weight DNA off of stamps? And he said, absolutely.
Oh.
So I went back to the medical school, talked to all my colleagues that I had previously worked with at the medical school. We came up with this procedure. We talked to the DNA laboratory in Washington, D.C., and I called them. I said, that's going to cost us like $40,000. I said, well, that's what we have to do. So we ended up doing it. Now, the cool thing was now we had high molecular weight DNA. We were able to get a search and seizure warrant, get the blood and saliva from the suspect, and match it to the letters, which we did.
Mhm.
This technique, this technique is now standard protocol in the FBI. It
Wow.
was used in the first Trade Center attack in 1994 or 93, which the prosecution went 94, to convict one of Ramzi Youssef's associates in the first attack of the World Trade Center. And so that trial in 94. Then it was
Mhm.
also used in the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski's case, when he was typing the letters and things, sending them out with his bombs and things of this nature. So this idea, this thing that happened with me, this Hail Mary moment where it was seemed completely impossible,
Yeah.
set into motion something that now, if you watch Forensic Files, Dateline, any of these shows on TV, you're going to see my technique that I
Hmm.
created used over and over and over across the country.
Wow.
The second thing that happened to me was, as I said, I was at Love Field on November 22nd, 1963, and never in my wildest dreams would I ever imagined that in 2008, the city of Dallas would come to me and say, Ferris, we want you to show us where Air Force One was parked on November 22nd. And I said, okay, we can go out there on the concourse, the tarmac, and I can show you.
Mhm.
Well, it seemed it had never been documented exactly where the plane was on that day. And so I showed them. Then they got this committee. And we all know what committees are like. They always say, a camel was designed by a committee and things of this nature. So we had the LBJ Library, we had the 6-4 Museum, we had the Frontiers of Flight Museum. We had all these people in these committees. And they all had their different, perspectives and agendas and things like this. And so they wanted to create some sort of something at Love Field, but at the bottom of the end of the day, they couldn't all decide. They couldn't, come up with this. So the whole thing just got scrapped. So City of Dallas comes to me in 2013 and says, hey, we want you to help us. You had shown us where Air Force One was. Can you possibly show us exactly where it was again and give us an idea what we can do to commemorate this moment? So I said, we can put in a historical marker. I did a Texas Historical Commission marker for Officer Tippit, where it was killed by Oswald. And so we can put a surface marker in. And they were like, oh, no, no, I don't know. The FAA would go for this. And I said, well, it's going to have to be something that's surface, flat, that planes can roll across, taxi across it. I said, well, let me check with the FAA. So I called the FAA up. Again, I didn't have any sort of friend I can call and say, hey, remember the last time you did a marker and you put it out on a tarmac of an active airport and planes rolled across? No, there's not any of this.
Yeah.
So I called up the FAA, said, who makes these kind of decisions? I need to talk to them. And a friend of mine goes, he sits right down the hall from me. He's literally down, he's like a couple of cubicles down. I said, well, we need to talk to this guy. So we end up talking to this guy. And he says, yeah, we could do that. So then it comes back. I said, we got it approved by the FAA. All they need is the engineering drawings and all this kind of stuff, the specs, everything. Then they said, well, oh my God, this is fantastic, but how much is it going to cost? I don't know. We have to find that out. So I call up a foundry up in Oklahoma, ARK Ramos, which is one of the best foundries in the United States. And I said, what would it cost to do this? And they said, it's going to be a few grand. So I come back, I said, well, it's going to be a couple of grand. And they go, oh my God, who's going to pay for this? What are we? So I finally said, geez, okay, it's like $2,000.
Yeah.
I said, tell you what, I'm under contract with Channel 8, WFAA, and ABC News to be their on-air talent. They paid me for the JFK 50th to produce a 22-part series, which got an Emmy Award for that. And so,
Yeah.
and so I said, tell you what, I'll pay for it.
Hmm.
They go, you'll pay for it? I said, yeah. So I said, I'll pay for it. I said, great, fantastic. They said, well, since you're going to pay for it, we'd really like to have a duplicate one inside the airport as well.
Hmm.
So would you consider doing two? I said, okay, so now I paid for two.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is 2 years rock along, we're not putting it in the ground. They had to wait until they got the $70 million concrete
Oh my gosh.
poured. And so yours truly is out there on the concourse with the construction team, and we're actually embedding this marker into the concrete. Now, the craziest thing about it is this marker is it's 43 pounds solid bronze. You can see a duplicate of it inside the airport now. It's on display. But what's amazing about this is that it has my name on it. It says it's donated by yours truly.
Mhm.
It's the most historic, well-guarded place in history in Dallas.
Wow.
Dealey Plaza, I always say, is a drive-by. He was going to lunch, he got killed, but he wasn't dead yet. He went to Parkland, he died at Parkland. That didn't exist. They scraped that off as well. But the actual site where a US president was inaugurated, Southwest Airlines is the only airline in the nation where you can taxi across US history,
Hmm.
taxi across where a president was inaugurated right there at Love Field.
Hmm.
And it's the most secure because it's on an active runway, TSA, FAA, Dallas police, they all guard it. And we
Wow.
have a light embedded in there that you can look from the observation deck and it shines back towards the window and see exactly where this history occurred. And it's
Wow.
like I never as a child would have ever imagined the day that I was out there that I'd be the guy, all these years later putting something in the ground. So that was another, as I call it, Hail Mary moment in the sense that it was against the odds. It was a miracle. I still to this day say, and a friend of mine who was the project manager, who's now deceased from left field,
Mhm.
dealing with the city of Dallas and the bureaucracy and all the maneuvering and all that, getting it done in a timely manner, getting it in the ground, but knowing it's going to be there for the rest of time. No, it's going to be there the concrete's rated for 100 years
Wow.
because I met with the engineer. But to know that if you step up in life, going
Mhm.
back to your initial question, if you say, you know what, I don't know how to do something, but I can research it, I can figure it out. You're going to have people, you're going to have spouses, you're going to have friends, you're going to have other people in your life, employers, the people that just maybe don't get it, or why are you spending so much time on this, or what are you getting out of it, or whatever. And if you can just if you can do it things in life for the right reason,
Mhm.
necessarily for I'm going to do it for money or whatever, I mean, the money will come.
Yeah.
But if you can get up and approach something, whatever your passion may be, and you can realize life is incredibly short, before you know it, you're dead. And the thing about it is we all have the same amount of time in our days. How we choose to spend that time, we can be sitting on Facebook, we can sit on TikTok, we can be, we can social media our lives away, or you can get up and, get up with a passion for what can I do? What difference can I make? And especially if you're doing something for the betterment of humanity. That's always, I mean, I could have sold out years ago and said, oh, yes, there's a big conspiracy, when that was popular, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes with doing these projects, these historical projects today. Most people think history is boring and they think, oh, you'll never make a living doing history. Oh, blah, 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 but find something you're passionate about, whatever it may be, and be the best at it. Be the best. Being second is kind of okay. When you can be the first and the only, I mean, the nice thing is being the only guy who's ever read all the files. I mean, that's why I don't debate idiots. It's like, if people would always say, they always want to say, well, you need to debate so and so, or you need to go on a TV show and debate somebody. No, if they haven't taken the time to read the materials, why should I argue with them? It's just
Right.
it's a waste of time. So I think one of the big takeaways, if you just look at me as a example, is when you don't plan something, when you allow things to happen and you listen to them and you pay attention in life, and if you're always paying attention and you have a sense of curiosity, it'll all come to you. It'll all make sense. But no one is going to somehow magically show you, okay, now this is how you have to do everything in life, and because sometimes I've learned from experience, when you get lost or you take the wrong turn, number one, you won't make that mistake again, hopefully. But number two, sometimes when you get off the highway of life and you take that wrong deviation or whatever, it leads you to something even better. And that is where you have to trust instinctually. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe that, you know what? Life, as JFK said, is life is terribly unfair. But at the end of the day, it can be the most beautiful experience in the world, and how you look at failure. We're all going to have moments in our life where we're going to fail, where we're going to, be kicked in the groin. One of my Pharisisms I always tell people is that, the only good thing about being kicked in the groin is it reminds you what you have. Other than that, it still sucks. And that's how life is going to be. You're going to have these moments where you can go, why did this have to happen to me? Or why can't I have the dream job? Or why can't I have what this guy has?
Mm.
Instead of focusing on being like that other guy, I try to inspire people to be the best version of you because you is the next version down the road. As they say, every 100 years, all new people. And so if somebody can draw some inspiration from the way I've lived my life and the way I've tried to pursue things and they can learn from it, great. And if they have no interest in it, well, that's fine. You
Yeah.
have to live your
Uh,
life that way.
that's it's truly fascinating. I mean, the truth is stranger than fiction, right? Our lives are proof of it.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, before we let you go, we have to ask about what we're going to see at It Came from Dallas. Such a great festival. It's always so much fun. We're going to see some archive footage that maybe we haven't seen before, right?
Well, the archive footage, the way history is told now is all visual. Everything now is visual. People don't read books, people don't read newspapers. Most people get their news now from YouTube and things of this nature. So what you're going to see, you're going to see a couple of things. You're going to see in one of the films, it's a documentary. I did not participate in it. I'm only being involved in it because I was involved in the archives setting up of all that before it was used. But it's a documentary produced by KERA that was produced. It's got Jane Pauley narrating the film footage, but it's all this archival film footage. And so what had happened was when we were setting up the sixth floor museum at Dealey Plaza, originally it was going to be a temporary exhibit. And so I was the guy saying, "Oh no, 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 no. We got to save all these negatives and film and video. We have to save all this stuff." They're like, "No, no, 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 no. We can't collect anything. This is only temporary." Well, I kept saying over and over and over, we have to preserve the film footage because that is going to be the story for generations to come. Well, sometimes when you are relentless and you're dealing with me, people listen. And so what happened was they ended up actually starting to preserve this video film footage, this archival film footage.
Mm.
And so the first footage that I seem to recall that the museum acquired was the first curator for the museum had gotten let go from KXAS, which is formerly WBAP, which was NBC affiliate in Dallas. He got let go from his job because his job was an announcer. He was the guy that would say, "One moment, please, please stand by." When they would, and so, you don't need that anymore. So he was let go from his job. And that was actually a blessing for him. It was, it's just that moment where his life was sucking at the moment. It's like, oh my God, I had this great job and I had this access to all this film footage. Well, what happens? He becomes the first curator for the Sixth Floor Museum. And so he used a radio name. His name was Gary Mack. That's a stage name. His real name is Larry Dunkel. And the anniversary of his passing was just the other day. And um, I was curious to see whether he was buried under Gary Mack or Larry Dunkel, but he's buried under Larry Dunkel. But Larry, or Gary, as people know him as, Gary says, "Hey, I think one of my first things I can provide to the museum is all this footage." And so, he ended up getting this archival footage donated. And so, collectively together, and I don't take total credit for any of this, what I set into motion really became like a domino effect. And so the film footage that you're going to see in this documentary is a collection of footage from all the television stations and radio and the like. And most people only see like, a few seconds of the Zapruder film. They see a snippet of, I'm just a patsy, and all that kind of stuff from Oswald, or they hear the gunshot of Jack Ruby. This whole package puts all of that together with the actual film footage, which when you see that, and then you see how, more importantly, how primitive all this stuff is, I mean, one of the reasons why Walter Cronkite, when he was the first on the air to announce that in fact the president had been shot. The reason why he couldn't go live with actual footage of him on air was because they had to get the vacuum tube, the tubes in the cameras to warm up before
Hmm.
they could power up the cameras. They're stringing cable, and you see this in the documentary. You see cable going out the windows, so they're trying to cover all this stuff. And then I think that is one of the most powerful things. And you stop and think, if for a second, had Larry or Gary not stepped up and said, hey, we need to preserve all this, as news media, organizations, TV, radio, newspaper get gobbled up by various things. I mean, good example is the Washington Post. They threw away all the original Watergate photographs that they had in their archives. People just start cleaning the closets, and that gets lost to history. I mean, it's gone. So the new generations probably have never seen any of this footage before. So that'll be a great opportunity. Same thing with the Bonnie and Clyde stuff. The great thing about the Bonnie and Clyde film, even though it won, I think it got like 10 Academy Award nominations and won two Academy Awards. I mean, for me, it's kind of surreal to think that was the first movie I ever saw being filmed, and then to have one of my films get an Academy Award nomination is like even crazier. But then to realize, oh my God, I'm related to Bonnie and Clyde. So for
Hmm.
people when they come out to the film festival, they're going to hear from somebody who talks about making films, and then they're going to also see, Raylene Linder and Buddy Barrow, to have living, people from the family. And I guess you could count me, but I don't really count me. I'm not like a real Bonnie and Clyde person. But anyway, you're going to be able to see a film with living people, and Raylene is in her 90s. And so this is a rare opportunity to come to the film festival and to see the film and to be able to ask a question or to be able to meet them or get a picture made with both of them. There are no spring. I'm the youngest one of all of them. But the way I look at it is, this is a rare and unique opportunity for people to come and see something, experience something, ask questions, and be a part of something very exciting. And I'm excited about coming back to Dallas and being a part of this. And my time is just crazy right now with all the things that we're working on. But I'm excited to come back there. I told Raylene the other night on, when I was visiting with her, she's like, "Oh my God, we're gonna have so much fun." Because I don't get to see her, and we've been trying to get together for I don't know how long, and now this is like an opportunity to come in and see Raylene and Buddy under this event of Bonnie and Clyde. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a really fun event. And I think that a lot of people, whatever age you may be, maybe the first time you ever seen the JFK footage, maybe the first time you ever seen the movie Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, it was made, think about this, it was shot in 66 and came out in 67, you know. And so there's not many people around anymore that, of that age generation that saw it. And certainly, thank God I was, just a child. I mean, one of the funny things is about the film was I grew up extremely poor. My parents didn't have central air conditioning in their house. And so we opened our windows and put box fans in the windows for our AC. And at nighttime, they were filming these scenes where they had the machine gun fire. And it was like so cool as a child to hear this, and I asked my dad, "Oh my God, what is that?" And they were filming, down the way, the scenes from the movie. And so we got to get in the car and go there and watch all this. And, to think, oh my God, that was 1966. Next year it'll be 60 years, 60 years. And that's like a lifetime. I mean, that's like many life. I mean, you think about what 60 years ago, it's like, that's like a child, a parent, and now grandparent,
Oh.
that kind of legacy. So people coming to this film festival, it might be cross generational in the sense of like you might have a new generation of people, or you might have parents, you might have grandparents, or people like that that say, "Yeah, I saw this movie when it first came out," or they've never seen it before. And so this is going to be a fun opportunity for people to experience.
It's going to be wonderful. Well, we can't wait to tell everybody check it out. If you could give us the website one more time, and also anything else that we need to know about, any new releases or anything coming up that we need to check out from you.
I don't have the full URL, but it came from Texas is the name of the film
Yep.
festival. It came from Texas. It's in
Your
Garland,
website.
Texas. And my website, people can visit at ferrisrookstool.com, ferrisrookstool.com.
Mhm. Wonderful. And anything else we need to look forward to coming up from you? Any new books? Hopefully a
No,
movie.
I'm just, I tell you what, we do have something very exciting, a project I've been working on that it'll probably be dedicated next year. Chili's restaurant. I love Chili's Grill and Bar. I was around from day one of Chili's Grill and Bar. I was commissioned by Brinker International, the parent company of Chili's. They hired me to be their official corporate historian to write the narrative of the founding of the company for a submission for a Texas Historical Commission marker. So
Amazing.
we are installing at the site of the very first Chili's, which is now America's favorite restaurant, a Texas Historical Commission marker at Greenville and Meadow Road. Sometime soon, as soon as it's all, all the logistics are worked out. But that's one of the exciting things that going there as a customer, being around the founder, Larry Levine, and then seeing this thing. I mean, Chili's made $100 in the first day, and now they're worth over $2.5 billion. It's a great Dallas. It's a great Texas story. It's like the American dream. And now Chili's in the world sells the most frozen margaritas and buys the most tequila of anyone in the entire world. And you think, wow, to be having had a front row, history to the birth of frozen margaritas. I mean, Mariana Martinez invented the machine, but Chili's knocked it out of the park when they started selling frozen margaritas. And to be the number one seller of frozen margaritas in the world is just mind-boggling.
That's
So the
incredible.
marker will be, as I say, coming on the scene here real soon. So that's just lots of excitement going on. It's never
Never dull. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I know we're way over. Really, really appreciate it. And we can't wait to see you in person. That he came from Dallas, and look forward to following along with your adventures. An absolutely fascinating person.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Okay. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.